I was born in Milford, Utah, January 15th, 1943.
Milford, Utah, August 17, 1949.
My parents, my dad was named Jack Burton Ogden. He was born in Lindell, Utah. My mother was Gwen LeMay Davis, and she was born in Minersville. And they met in Milford when my dad was working as an engineer or a fireman on Union Pacific trains, and my mother was working as a waitress in the cafe there.
My dad is James Edward Price, but everybody called him Ted, and his family called him Ted Edward. They all had nicknames for each other, and his name was Ted. He was born in Beaver. My mother was Phyllis Rollins, and she was born in Minersville, same as Grandma Ogden.
I'm the oldest of four siblings. I'm the oldest. My sister Vicky was next, and my brother Chad was next, and my brother Kevin was the youngest. My sister Vicky has passed away, and my brother Chad has passed away, and my brother Kevin lives in is it Bountiful? Centerville, Utah.
I'm the middle child. That makes me wonderful, right? My big brother his name was Robert Daniel, but even though he's 70-something years old, we still call him Danny. And my little sister, who's been taller than me since I was 12, is Joanne Edwards.
We played. We spent all our time outside playing make-believe, riding bicycles, skating with roller skates, playing games.
Swimming.
We went swimming at the local swimming pool, go to movies, Saturday matinees at the movie theater.
I didn't do all of those things, but because we lived on a farm for about 9 years till I was, we lived in town when I was young, and I remember going to the swimming pool and taking a dime because that's what it cost. He was a lifeguard at the swimming pool, and I remember going. I don't remember him, but I remember going. So we just played outside or read. We read a lot.
Well, my home life was, I spent a lot of time when I was young in Minersville with my grandpa and grandma Davis, my mother's parents. For some reason, I spent a lot of time there, but my home life wasn't good. It was, my parents quarreled and fought a lot, and it was just not a good kind of home life.
And I always felt loved in my house. My dad had a very explosive temper. Like I said, I was the middle child, and I was wonderful, so he never got mad at me. But he got mad at Danny a lot, and that caused contention. And he drank, and he liked to gamble. And so on the days he got paid, the first place he would go, the B&J in Milford, and he'd play Pan, it was called, and gamble and drink. And it would make my mother so mad because she had already spent his check, and then he was down gambling with it. So there was contention there, but I never really felt like I wasn't loved and cared for. My parents were good parents. We always knew what was expected of me, and I knew that I didn't ever want to disappoint them.
That's what we'd ask ourselves all the time, is why us? And maybe there was people up there somewhere that were working on us, helping us. But when I was growing up, I don't remember going to primary or anything like that, or nor going. My mother and dad never went to church, so I never went. But as I got older, I went. I would go to priesthood and sacrament meeting. I remember as a priest blessing the sacrament. And so often I was probably as regular as anybody going to church, but Grandma was even more regular than that.
Well, I remember always wanting to go. And my mother always made sure that we had dresses and Sunday clothes. Danny went with us probably until he was 12. And then he didn't want to go anymore. Probably because my dad didn't go. My dad went till he was 12 and then he was done. So, but I always wanted to go, and Mom would always drive us. She never went with us that I remember ever. But I always went to primary. But primary was after school. So we would just go after school was over, we'd just walk to the church and go to primary. Mom would pick us up. We always went. And in Milford, mutual is social time. And even non-member kids would go to mutual activities without even thinking about it. That was one of the social things that we did. And so I always went to mutual. I went to seminary. I always took seminary. Did you?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we always took seminary. I was on the seminary council kind of thing, I think. And I just always wanted to go. And Joanne said to me not very long ago, she said, "Why did you go to church?" And I said, I just always felt like I wanted to. She said, "Why did you go?" And she says, "Because you did." And that's what she went, because we went together when we got old enough to do that. And we just kept going.
Yeah, but with my mother and dad not being active at all, and my mother's dad and mother weren't active at all, the only time I remember going to church in Minersville is when I was baptized, and when my brother Chad was giving a blessed name and a blessing. And then one time when I was young, I went with my grandpa Davis. They were building the church and they were putting shingles on the roof. I remember going with him to do that. But that was it. We didn't have a religious upbringing at all. But it's interesting, and we still wonder about it. School was always fun. I remember some things about kindergarten. It was, we did a lot of things. We had a sandbox. We made toys out of pieces of wood. We had nap time. We always got milk and crackers. I hated the milk because it was never cold. So I just ate crackers. We went to the same school all the way up through the 6th grade. And the school was 2-storied, so there were classes sometimes upstairs and sometimes downstairs.
Well, I went to the same school. I was just 7 years behind him. But went to the same school. We had the same kindergarten teacher. Her name was Mrs. Bond. We liked her. We had the same 5th grade teacher. His name was Mr. Fisher, and he lived across the street from Grandma and Grandpa Ogden. He taught my dad too. He had a paddle. If you didn't do what you were supposed to, you could get whacked with the paddle. The next morning, you got to think about it all night. But I never got to do it. Grandpa didn't either, I don't think. Did you?
No.
So we really went to the same elementary school, went to the same high school, had a lot of the same teachers. We did a lot of the same things. I was just behind him.
Talk about cheerleading a little bit in Milford. What was that like?
Well, you know, Milford High School's not very big. I had a class of 33 that graduated with me. There's a few more started, but 33 graduated. So there weren't very many. I think there were probably 14 or 15 girls, something like that. So, you know, if you wanted to be a cheerleader, you tried out. And I, I did it. See, I could have done it 5 years because they let us do that the 7th grade. And I didn't, I made it 3 years, and 2 years I didn't. So I was as a senior. It was fun. We got to ride on the bus with the team, and everywhere the team went, we went. There were just 3 of us, 3 cheerleaders, so we'd go and sit up front by the coaches, and we got to go everywhere they went. See them lose everywhere they went. Well, we had fun because our football field had lights. A lot of the high schools in southern Utah didn't have lights at their football field, but ours did, so we had nighttime games, which were really fun. And the whole town would come, and it was just, it was fun. It was fun to be a cheerleader, and I didn't keep any of my uniforms. I wish I had, but I didn't. Somebody must have them somewhere, but I don't have them.
In practice one time, I was a defensive back, and I was probably, let's see, Wayne Hardy was the quarterback, so I would probably want a sophomore.
Probably.
And I was breaking through and tackling him, and I did it over and over, and he got really mad. He told the coach to have me quit, and he didn't. In one play, I remember looking up, and here come this 180-pound, 6'2" running back coming right through the line at me, and that's the last I remember. I woke up sometime later on my feet, but I had been out on my feet.
You probably weighed 120,
No, that was when I was heavy at 120,
maybe.
105 or so.
Wasn't big. Well, the summer after I graduated, I worked in Mesa Verde for the whole summer. I worked in the museum, and I sold books. That was fun. I lived right next door to my aunt and uncle, and he was the chief park archaeologist. That's why I got the job. And it was fun. I loved it there, and we've always loved to go there. I'd go every summer. We've been 3 or 4 times. I spend all summer there. I remember my dad saying to my mom, "I thought she got paid. She doesn't have any money. What did she do with their money?" I don't know. I spent it. That's what I did. Then I went to LDS Business College for
Couple of weeks.
not much. Well, I went, but I had already met you, hadn't I? No, I went.
No, you were in.
And I went in September, and we were dating in December. But so I went back. I must have gone for 2 semesters or whatever they call them. And but I didn't do much the second one because we got married in April, and I didn't ever finish anything. I didn't try very hard.
My second year out of high school, I got a draft notice one day, and the next day my dad took me on the train, and we went to Salt Lake, and he took me to a recruiter for the Air Force, and I joined the Air Force, and that night I was on a plane for Texas for basic training, and I was in basic training in Texas, and then for 2 or 3 months, and then I went from there to Mississippi, where I trained as an electronic technician, radar repairman for a year. And then I was in Washington State for a while, and then stationed in Alaska for the last 9 months of my military. I didn't want to be in the military necessarily, but there were some things that I did enjoy about it. When I was serving in Washington State, I was selected to be on a team. I was the lowest ranking person. There was me and 2 sergeants. And we maintained what was called a gap filler radar site up near the Canadian border. We were about a 2-hour or so drive away from our base. And we'd go up there on a Monday morning and stay all week and come home on Friday night. And we stayed at the radar site. It was up in the top of the mountains. We had cots we slept on. We had a 2-channel radar with a 2-channel microwave that sent the radar information from that site down to our base in Othello, Washington. And I maintained the microwave and worked on some of the radar. We had 3 diesel power engines that generated our electricity, and they were set so that they were automatic. If one went down, the other one came on. I remember going up there in the winter in a snowcat and having to cut trees out of the road so we could get up. The guy in the snowcat would take us up there and leave us, and we'd stay up there during the week, and he'd come and get us, hopefully, at the end of the week. And then we'd go back. But that was an interesting and fun time. We were issued an M1 30 caliber carbine rifle with probably 1,000 rounds of ammunition, and I got so I could shoot the head off a grouse with it. We ate a lot of grouse, and that was just an interesting time for me. Well, one that I remember is when the Russians launched the first space satellite, and we listened to it. It just beeped. And that was a major event, the first satellite around the Earth that was launched from Earth. And then later on, the first American man, I think the Russians had the first manned flight, and then the Americans did it, and we went around more times than the Russians. But that was early space things. One of the major things that happened when I was young is the discovery of the vaccine for polio. Prior to that, people got polio, and it was not necessarily a major death cause, but it caused the lack of use of arms and legs. And if it was severe, the lack of your body to breathe, and you had to, if you had that, you had to lay in what was called an iron lung, where it pressurized and depressurized to help you breathe so you didn't die. And so polio, that was a big thing to have happen then, the vaccine for polio. And it was given by putting the vaccine on a sugar cube, and you ate the sugar cube.
Everybody in town went to the new elementary school. Even my dad came, and he didn't do any social stuff. But we all went and had a sugar cube. Everybody went together. I remember a big long line of people up waiting to get it. It was a big deal. I like to read the newspaper, and my dad always got the newspaper. I remember when tanks rolled into Hungary. When would that have been? I would have been a little girl. But it was the Russians taking over Hungary. And that, I remember the headline of that. Of course, the Vietnam War was a big deal. You know, Grandpa went to the service because he was going to get drafted, and if he didn't join, he would have been drafted, and then he would have been in the Army and probably been infantry or whatever. So he joined the Air Force. My brother joined the Air Force. Several boys in my class ended up serving in Vietnam, and the boy across the street from my mother's house in Milford was killed in Vietnam. So that was a big deal for us as we were going through teenage and after high school.
When I was discharged from the Air Force, I came home. It was in November, and I was not going to start at BYU until in January. And so I went back to Milford to live with my parents, and I got a job at the grocery store, stocking shelves at the grocery store. And this girl kept coming in, and she would come in and she'd buy 1 can of milk.
That's not true.
And her mother was sending her because I was working there. She wanted, that's how we became acquainted, as I saw her. But where we really got together was we were at church on Christmas Eve. It was a Sunday. And then we had sacrament meeting in the evening on Sunday. So we were at sacrament meeting, and I asked her if she let me take her home and that's where we all come from.
You picked me up at church.
Wasn't there some story, Grandma, that you have about Grandpa coming over and there was like another guy and Grandpa left and you had
There was more than one. There was a house full of them.
Oh, there was.
Let's hear that story.
No, but that wasn't the same night, was it?
No,
No.
that was later on.
Yeah, he came up to visit me. And he hadn't ever been there.
No,
I think it was the first time he'd really come in the house. And you have to know our mothers knew each other because they grew up in Minersville together. But he hadn't been in our house, and he came up to visit me. And before he got there, this other guy named George came in. I didn't know he was coming. He came in to visit me. And when Grandpa got there, George was already there. And he was looking around like, what is going on here? Because I knew he was coming, but I didn't know George was coming. And while they were both there, the phone rang. And my mother says, "This is for you." Oh, great, who's this? And it was
somebody else wanted to come over.
It was Dickie Walker, and he was inviting me to go to the New Year's Eve dance. So Grandpa got up and left.
I said, this is too much for me. I took off.
He got up and went home. And I told Dick no. I told Dickie Walker no. But I think I did. I'm sure I did. Told him I had other plans. I didn't, but I told him that. And so Grandpa went home, and as soon as I got George out of the way, told him to, I don't know how I got him to leave, but he left. I guess he kind of got the idea that I really didn't want him there. And so I remember going back in my mom and dad's bedroom, and they had a telephone back there, and I went back there and I called Grandpa's house. And I had never called a boy before in my life. Girls don't call boys. I never would have called him. I called him and I said, "What did you leave for?" And he says, "Well, there were too many people or something." I said, "Well, get back up here. I made them all go home. You come back." So he came back.
Tell him.
We got engaged on Valentine's Day. So
February.
Christmas till Valentine's Day. He gave me this ring here that I've worn for all these years. And then we got married April 12th, which is spring break.
The proposal story. I would. I was enrolled at BYU, and I would go up to Salt Lake about one night during the week and visit Grandma. And that was one night. It was on. It was Valentine's, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And I just went up to visit her and proposed.
You don't remember where you had the ring?
No. Where was it?
He taped it to the inside of the glove box. We call it the jockey box. But he opened it and he had this, I have it still, it's this red velvet box, and he had it taped there. So when I opened it, it was sitting right there. He already knew what I was going to say.
Oh, it was long. I picked Grandma up early in the morning and we drove down to
4:30.
drove from Milford to St. George. We got down there and went through the ceremonies, getting initiatory and endowment. And after that, we came back to Milford, where we had a reception which lasted till 9 or 10 o'clock, and then we drove from there to Cedar. So it was, we probably didn't get over there till midnight or after.
Probably.
It was just along.
Pretty sure I slept all the way. I'd do that. The temple was a lot different then. They've changed a lot of things since we went, and we were not prepared for the temple at all.
No.
We hadn't taken a temple class.
We didn't know anything about
We
it.
didn't have any idea really what was going to happen. Well, I think the bishop tried to explain a little bit to us when we had our interviews, but we didn't really know what was going to happen. We didn't go back for 2 years. We went back in our Springville, where they had a bus, and we had to go to Manti, because that was our, Provo didn't have a temple then, and you went to Manti. And we rode on the bus to Manti, and that was the first time we'd been since we were married.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. But then we went after that. It was okay. But it was, we just really weren't prepared.
Well, that's an interesting story. When I graduated from college, I had had one job offer that I didn't like, so I didn't take it. And so I didn't have a job, and we talked and we went home to Grandma's.
It was Memorial Day, or when fishing season opened, Memorial Day.
I don't remember. We went home to Grandma's parents, and I decided maybe that would be best if we stayed there, and I just helped with the farming because Grandma's dad had a farm, and when he was working on the railroad, he couldn't take care of it, so I would stay and help him. And then one night while we were there, the whole day I had this feeling we need to go back to Provo. And I had it, and it got stronger and stronger, and so before we went to bed, I had to go change the water the next morning. I told Grandma in the morning, after I get back from changing the water, we need to go back to Provo. And Grandma says, well, why? And I says, I don't know. So the next morning we went back to Provo, and on the way back we went through Delta, so I stopped and called the bank, First Security Bank there, and asked them about jobs, and they said, well, all the job hiring was done by the region office in Spanish Fork. So we went through Spanish Fork, and I stopped at that office and talked to the secretary there, who later became a good friend, Jean Hancock. And she said, well, the person I would need to talk to wasn't in, but if I'd leave my name and number, if he wanted to talk to me, he'd call. And so we went back to Provo, and I still didn't have an idea why we had to be back. But as we were walking up the steps to the house we were renting, I could hear the phone ringing. So I hurried and opened the door and went in. It was Jean Hancock from that office, the region office. She said that the person I needed to talk to was in and he wanted to see me, if I could come right back. So I hurried and got my suit on and went back and interviewed with him, and he said, well, he would like to hire me, but I would have to be interviewed by some people at the head office in Salt Lake. But he didn't know when. They were busy, and he'd have to see when he could do that. So I went home and to Provo, and the next day the secretary Jean called me from Spanish Fork and says I had an appointment the next day to be interviewed in Salt Lake. And so I went up there and was interviewed and was hired. I was in the training program for a year. I worked in the Provo office of First Security Bank. And then after a year of doing that, I went down there. They were building a new bank building in Delta, and they sent me down there to help put furniture together. And while I was down there doing that, they called me and says, you're going to stay there. And so that's how we went to work in Delta. I became the assistant manager in the Delta office of First Security Bank. And there we stayed for many years.
We tried to leave many times, but it never worked. It was a good place to raise our kids.
The bank leadership changed, and they changed their philosophy on how they want to be organized. And so they were kind of pushing people like me who had come up through the ranks to be managers. They didn't want decision makers. Mm-hmm. They didn't want decision makers. They want all decisions to be made in some central location. So they didn't need managers. They just needed somebody to open the doors and
some woman with no experience.
And so one day I got called to Spanish Fork. They had me come up there, and so I went up, and one of the people took me to lunch, and we talked, and I don't remember anything being said about.
Well, they wanted us to move to Cedar.
Well, no, they just indicated there were some things available, but when I went back to Delta and went back in the bank that day, somebody had already sent the guy down there to replace me. They said I could go to Cedar City and be a loan officer down in Cedar City.
He said no.
Well, I went down there for a month and just went down during the week and worked down there. I didn't like it. So I quit. And then went to work for Art Jeffrey, and then ended up getting a job out at the plant as a laborer. And I worked in the electrical department as a laborer for a while, and then I went from there and got a job in the warehouse, working in the warehouse. From there to the safety department, working there. And so I had about 12 years with the bank and 12 years with the power plant. Discipline. Disciplining kids, knowing how to discipline, and
being on the same page, disciplining.
It was always funny to watch the kids. They would get rowdy and out of control, and I'd try to get them under control, so I'd take my belt off and double it over and snap it, and they'd all squeal and run. And so. But when they got older, it wasn't that easy.
No, but we didn't have many troubles.
No, babe, no, none. No, I can't remember any troubles.
I'm sure there's things that he doesn't know.
More than likely.
Mm-hmm. Well, for quite a few years, you worked days or you worked nights. So you slept all day and you were gone all night. So, he wasn't home when they went places and didn't have to worry about if they came home on time because he was gone to work. They usually came home on time. because they knew I was home worrying about them.
For me, I think it was the times we spent together camping or going up the canyon having tinfoil dinners or going out arrowhead hunting or out to the trilobites or any of those kind of things. Those were fun things to do.
Sarah says she and Steve didn't get to do any of those things, that we only did it with the older kids because she doesn't have those memories. And we might not have done them as often when they were older, but we did do that a lot. We'd just say, let's go to the canyon and have dinner. And in a half an hour, we were in the car and we were going up there to have tinfoil dinners or Dutch oven or something. And we had fun. Well, I remember Cheryl was given a blessing by Elder Scott when she was just 16 years old. We were having stake conference and Gramps had just been released and the stake presidency, and we were at President Christensen's house and Elder Scott was there, and he sent Gramps out, I guess, I don't remember, but he wanted Cheryl to come in and see him. And so Cheryl went in not knowing what he wanted, and what he wanted was to give her a blessing. And what everybody in the state didn't know was Gramps had just lost his job on Friday before he was released from the stake presidency on Sunday. So all of a sudden, he didn't have a job and he didn't have a church job. And it was like, what's going on in our house? But I wasn't there when he gave her the blessing, but I think you were.
I can't remember.
But what I remember them telling me is that he told her in that blessing that she would be able to influence young people in the church, and that was her calling, was to influence young people in the church. And she's done that. I don't know how many times she's been primary president down there in Texas. I think she's even worked with young women. She's been Relief Society president, but she was given that blessing by an apostle.
The things that I remember the most are Mom making homemade bread, and we'd eat big slices of homemade bread with sugar and milk on them. We loved that. I remember all the weird things Mom taught us to eat, like macaroni with milk and cheese sandwiches and applesauce. I remember Mom always making sure that when Dad was coming home from work, she would have onions and peppers cooking somewhere so it would smell like she had dinner going, even if she didn't. I remember Mom pulling taffy. Used to love to sit and watch her pull taffy, usually just at Christmas, but she would pull taffy. And all the time she was pulling taffy, she was telling us stories about her grandma. And Mom always reading. She didn't really like to read to us, but she was always reading, and we read all the time. I remember Dad being in the garden, and we'd go out early in the mornings on Saturdays, and we'd have a certain number of rows to pick. I hated that. Dad grew the best garden in town, and we'd spend all summer eating it and learning how to can it with Mom. I remember lots of the time we spent in the Beaver Mountains. Dad would take us hiking, and we'd ask him about the names of all the plants, and he would tell us things like it's a purple by the rockius or a yellow by traileus, and we believed him for a long time that that's what those were called. But we hiked all over in those mountains. I remember Dad sitting cross-legged on the ground without moving for a long time with nuts and seeds on his pants waiting for the chipmunks to come and get them. And he tried to teach us, but I just never could sit as long as Dad could. But we hiked all over in there. When we had the old trailer, I remember standing on the edge of LeBaron Lake, always just before it got dark, fishing with Dad and watching the fish jump. Or really early in the morning, we'd go down there and stand, and he'd spend hours fixing flies and bubbles for us so we could fish. But really what we wanted to do was cast, and we'd stand there. But I always remember standing there at dusk and watching the fish jump and the deer coming down out of the trees and fishing. I remember once Dad and I went on a hike up in there by ourselves. Well, I think I was with the young women, and Dad was the lead. He had agreed to take everybody on that. I can't remember how old I was, but I think it had to be the 5th year hike. And I think we started in Three Creeks, and we walked up the back way and came up behind the dam at LeBaron Meadows. And it was the young women, but it was just me and Dad, and I remember that, and that was a really fun hike, and we stayed in tents down behind the dam at LeBaron. I remember Dad dressing up like one of the shepherds at Christmas time, and whoever was his youth companion for home teaching, and they'd dress up as shepherds, and they'd go door to door telling everybody that the Christ child was born and telling them the Christmas story. He always put a lot of thought into being a home teacher and making sure that it was a good experience for his families. I remember, and Dad still is a great teacher. He gave great talks and great lessons, and he always had really good object lessons, and he was just a great speaker. And I remember being impressed by how good he was at speaking. I remember going to Philmont Scout Ranch as a family. And that was fun. I remember going with Dad to do the Order of the Arrow once. And I can't remember how old I was, but I remember being there when they send all those boys out to spend the night. I can't even remember where that was, but I remember being with Dad when he was at that. All the times we drove up to Beaver, Mom spent the whole drive telling us about our family and her childhood memories of being up in those mountains. And every time we went by Puffers, she would tell us about her dad sitting on the edge of Puffers, and her and Joanne running around playing, and her dad would drink a beer and wrap the fishing line, put rocks in the can and wrap the fishing line around it, and then lay down and go to sleep, because if the fish took the bait, it would knock that can over and wake him up. And she told us that story every time we went by Puffers, and that her and Joanne would just run and play, and her dad would lay on the bank there and sleep while they played at Puffers. All the things I know about my family came from Mom telling us stories. And most of the time it was when she was pulling taffy or we were driving up to Beaver, she would tell us the stories about them. Those are the things that I think about when I think about growing up, is those times that we spent as a family. I remember the summer that we went to Mesa Verde, all of us in that old yellow-green car, crammed in that one car, all of our camping stuff, everything, and we pulled into a campground at Mesa Verde and piled out like clowns at a circus and set up our camping stuff and tents. And I remember that trip. It was a fun trip, but we were crammed in that car. You couldn't get away with that today, but we did it. I remember doing that. I remember Mom and Dad waiting till we would all go to bed and popping popcorn and drinking grape juice, thinking that we didn't know that's what they were up doing, but we did. I remember Christmas Eves wanting to get up really early, and Dad would make us stay in bed, and we'd go up and bug him, and he'd send us back to bed. It was a game with Dad. It was how long he could get us to stay in bed so we didn't have to get up. Mostly what I remember are the trips. You know what I remember about Dad is that every school year Dad would give us a priesthood blessing, Father's blessing before school started, but also we used to have Father priesthood interviews, and he would call us in and interview us and ask us questions about how we were doing in our life. And I always remember the priesthood blessings before school started. I remember my dad being very dedicated to service, anonymous service. And he's the one that got us doing the 12 days of Christmas that I used to do with my kids when they were little. And it was really important that no one ever knew that we were the ones doing it. But Dad would help us, and Mom, and we would do 12 days of Christmas to some neighbor every Christmas. And I know Dad gave people lots of food out of his garden and never told anyone he was doing it. You know, the one thing that always impressed me about Dad and his garden is that I know he paid tithing on it. He figured out how much it would have cost him to have that food, and he paid tithing because it was an increase. And I'm sure that's why his garden was always so good, because he paid tithing on his garden. I know he did that. I think my parents were just really good examples to me of how to raise kids, because they did a good job. I always felt like my parents did a good job raising all of us, and I try to do the same things, even the things I thought were terrible at the time, like no sleepovers and all that stuff. And then when I was a parent, I thought that's a really good idea, and I did it too. So they've always been a really good example of how to be parents, and I love them.
So what do you want to say about Carrie?
Carrie was always fun and always the center of attention because of her hair or lack of it when she was first born, and
Yeah, she didn't have any.
always happy and outgoing, and people were very interested in her.
When Cheryl and Carrie were both old enough to babysit, if the mothers were choosing who they asked, they would choose Cheryl. Because when they got home, the kids would be in bed, the dishes were done, the house was picked up, and Cheryl was asleep on the couch. If the kids got to choose who they wanted as babysitters, they would choose Carrie. Because when the parents got home, nobody was in bed. Every toy was out in the middle of the living room floor. No dishes were done, no kids were asleep, and they were having a great time. That was Carrie, and still is.
When we used to go camping at Beaver, and we were little, we would stay for a long time, like, I don't know, days at least. I don't think we ever stayed a week, but we always camped in the same spot, and it usually rained. And so Mom would have games and stuff in the trailer. We had a trailer, and so she had games for us to play because it rained every afternoon. So that's why we always play Clue. All of us know how to play Clue because we played Clue all the time in the trailer, and colored all the time. One thing funny Grandma or Mom used to do when she made all of our clothes when we were little, all of our clothes, everything. She even made our swimsuits she made. And I remember, I think I had to miss the opening day of the swimming pool because she wasn't finished making my swimsuit. Oh, Dad, he used to ride the exercise bike in the basement all the time to exercise. And he would get so sweaty, just like dripping with sweat. And we were probably 10, 11, 12, somewhere in there. And he would chase us around the house and he was so gross and sweaty. And we would just run and run. He thought it was funny. But that was one of the silly things that he would do. But it was gross. So Mom would try to make chores fun on Saturday mornings, and so she would always put chores in a hat, like folded up papers, and I don't know why we thought this was fun. So you would try to do as many chores as you could, and then so you keep your paper, and then when all the chores were done in the hat, then we were done. And then we'd all empty our pockets to see who had done the most chores. I don't know how that's fun or why we would always do that on Saturdays. But the chores would be like clean out the fridge, straighten the linen closet, clean the bathrooms, vacuum upstairs, downstairs, put away clothes. I don't know. And we did all the chores. We did everything. And I think we were all pretty, I don't know. I think no one complained about doing it. I think the only time we started complaining about chores was when we had to weed the garden, and that was just not as fun because we'd have to weed so many rows a day. So, or like on Saturday mornings, you had, like Dad would say, "Okay, everybody needs to weed 5 rows or something," and that wasn't even. We had a big garden, so 5 rows, a kid wasn't even getting the whole garden, I'm sure. But, so we would weed on Saturday mornings before we could go play too in the summertime. When Grandpa got put in when he got set apart by to be in the state presidency, Tom Perry and one of the other guys, I can't remember who it was, came and set him apart. As soon as he got put in the state presidency, no more caffeine in anything. We had blonde brownies. We didn't have chocolate brownies for a long time because of the caffeine in the chocolate. So he does not toe the line. He does toe the line. He never, if he says there's no gray, it's black or white. So yeah, we went a long time with making blonde brownies every Sunday. So we were talking about Joseph Smith in the first vision, and I don't remember how old we were. I'm sure we were pretty little. And Mom and Dad had went and buried the Book of Mormons, but they were gold and had hieroglyphics on them. They don't make those anymore, I'm sure. But, and they had buried them, like by the railroad tracks or something. And so we went and found these Book of Mormons and dug them up, and we all had these gold Book of Mormons. We read scriptures in the morning, and that wasn't fun. Getting up and reading scriptures at 6 o'clock in the morning. I remember all the kids had blankets wrapped around them, trying not to go to sleep, but we did it. We'd read the scriptures in the morning before school. I remember once when I wanted to be a Boy Scout so bad and be in the Scouts, because Dad was always in the Scouts and the scouting program, and they were always doing fun stuff like Order the Arrow. I thought that was so fun when he got tacked out and we all got to go to the ceremony, and that was so fun. And then when I had to have been, maybe I was 10, and Dad was a scout leader, and he let us come with the scouts to hike Timpanogos, and there were other daughters that went, probably Lisa Nilsson and me and maybe Cheryl and Amy, or maybe just Amy. I don't know if Cheryl would do it, but we had to get up at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and we drove to Provo and to the canyon, and then we hiked Timpanogos up and down, and that was really fun. But after that, I think they didn't allow leaders to take their daughters anymore or something.
Amy.
I did Gerry.
Oh, you did Gerry. Okay, Amy. Amy has always been everybody's favorite person. All the grandkids, nieces and nephews, when she walks in the room, she's their center of attention. Because she didn't have kids and wasn't married until she was 40. And so all of the grandkids became hers. And she has been good to all of them. Still is, even though she's got Sarah and Allie and Andy now. But they still are really important to her. And she works in young women, or she has been working in young women, and those girls just love her. They really respect her, the way she lives and her job, and they just really like her. And I think she's been an influence on a lot of young girls.
Well, I remember when I was in first or second grade, I can't remember which, and I wouldn't eat my lunch. My mom would pack me a lunch and I wouldn't eat it. And in my Holly Hobby lunchbox, I would take my lunch to school, and then I wanted to go out to recess, so I didn't eat it, and I would throw it away or take it home. And the teacher called my mom and told her that I wasn't eating lunch, and so she asked me, why aren't you eating your lunch? I pack you everything you liked. I love SpaghettiOs, and she would put those in the thermos and send them to school, and I wouldn't eat them. And so one day, my dad showed up at school and sat by me at lunch, so I would eat my lunch, and I was like, oh my gosh, why is my dad here? I remember he was wearing like this big long kind of trench coat thing. He was working at the bank, and he walked over and sat with me and while I ate my lunch, and then he took me outside and he's like, now do you want me to come eat lunch with you every day? And I was like, no, not really. And he's like, hey, well, you gotta eat your lunch every day or I'm gonna come eat lunch with you. And I was like, okay. And then I ate my lunch from then on so that my parents wouldn't come to lunch with me. I remember when I was little, my dad used to chase us around the kitchen table and try to make us dance with him. And he would want us to stand on his feet and dance around. He was a pretty good dancer. He liked music a lot. So he would always try and catch us and make us dance with him. My mom is always, what I remember about my mom growing up is she's always doing some type of project, either making a dress or clothes or an afghan or tatting or something crafty. She's always been doing something crafty. Let's see, I remember my Aunt Vicky telling me a story about my dad jumping on the train when he was in high school. And he and his friends would take their guitars and jump on the train and ride down to Vegas. And then they would spend the weekend playing their guitars on the corner. And people would give them money, and then they'd get on the train and come back. So my dad's a pretty good guitar player. My dad's always been a pretty big joker. He's pretty witty. I remember a lot growing up that he would tease us all the time, and not just the kids, but he would, I know he had some running pranks going with Deb Greathouse and Laurie Griffiths. I remember that growing up, that there was always pranks going back and forth. My dad was big into scouting, so as a girl, I got to go to a lot of scout camps. I remember going to a scout camp, I think it's where they do the Arrow of Light, where the boys go off in the forest by themselves or something like that. And I remember thinking that it was like some weird ritual. Like I wondered if the boys were going to come back alive. I don't know how old I was, but I do remember going to a lot of scout camps. I hiked Temp with the scouts with my dad. We did a lot of scouting. I remember picking my dad up from coming home from camping in the Uintas with the scouts, and then trying to hug my mom and chasing her around because he smelled horrible. And my mom would just tell him to burn all his clothes and not bring him home because they smelled so bad after being up there for a week or so. And let's see, I remember going to Philmont as with our family, my dad for scout camp, and while my dad was doing his scouting meetings or whatever, the kids were off, we had activities and we just went and played and had a really good time. So scouting was big. I remember one time my dad was had a calling in the welfare, I can't remember what it was, area of welfare representative or something like that, and we went around and spoke in all different wards around our county, and we were over in Fillmore somewhere talking in church, and we were coming back, or maybe it was a fireside, I can't remember. We were coming back, and a man and his wife got stranded. Their car broke down in the middle of nowhere. So there's 9 of us already in a car that fits 5 people. And they were like, my dad's like, oh, get in, we'll take you. And so we got him in the car. We piled in somehow. We got home, and my mom made dinner, and they ate with us. And my dad found someone to help fix their car and got him back on the road and all that stuff. And that was a good lesson for me, knowing that, you know, really, we didn't have room for him. We weren't planning. It was a big problem, but my parents just made it work and helped him. And they were nice people. I remember they sent us a whole bunch of games and stuff when we were kids. We thought that was cool. We always had a really big garden growing up. And as a kid, we benefited from it. I liked all the fresh vegetables and stuff, but man, I hated weeding that garden. We had to get up every Saturday and weed for like an hour every Saturday, or do so many rows. Oh, I hated that. But we always had fresh vegetables. I remember our family's picture. They came and took pictures of our garden and of our family and put it in the bishop's storehouse or I can't remember where the pictures were put, somewhere, to do with the welfare program when we were kids. Michael, it's your turn.
Michael was at a disadvantage from the start, having 3 older sisters.
Yes.
It was a battle, but everything was different for him. A bathrobe was a house coat. His underwears were panties. It was always, and so
True.
he had to struggle through all of that, all his life, having 3 older sisters to continually be moms to him.
Yes.
But he succeeded.
Because of them, I think he is a really good dad. And not just because of them, but he is a good dad. He is involved in everything that goes on with those 3 little boys. He cooks. I don't know how much cleaning he does, but he supervises cleaning. And I've watched him teach them by letting them help him, which isn't easy.
They go, I don't know if they still do, but the lumber place, what's it called? Home Depot has a day where they have a particular thing that you can come and make. And he takes these boys and they all go down and get that, and they make it. It might be a birdhouse, it might be
A kid of some kind.
any kind of a thing, but it's something they put together, and they all go do that together. And I think that's been good for him and his boys.
We would be taught a lot by our parents, trying to do everything that the gospel teaches and trying to do what the church wants us to do, like family home evening. That was always rough. None of us wanted to do it, but Dad was. No, we were going to have a lesson. We were going to have everything. It was going to be very spiritual. But there are certain things that we did that still to this day crack me up that he even did it. We had a family home evening where he took us in and taught us how to do a shower. I guess we were using too much water, too much soap. I don't know what it was that got in his brain, but we had to be taught how to take a shower. That, you have the water on, you soap up, you turn the water off. No, you turn the water on, get wet, soap up, turn the water off. Nope, still got it wrong. Turn the water on, get wet, turn it off, then soap up. Turn the water back on and rinse. That's how you shower. We had to have a lesson on that. Mom really, she's a huge example of being able to oftentimes work through a struggle and keep a positive attitude, which is something that she's taught me, or I've learned, I guess, from her, is that we are happy if we choose to be, and we are able to make our day better if we look in the mirror and say, I'm going to have a good day today. But that's not to say that she was always level-headed. I mean, my ears got twisted almost off on occasion. In fact, I believe I don't have any feeling in my ears anymore because of how often they were twisted. They can twist pretty much all the way around. It doesn't bother me. She says I was never really hit with a wooden spoon, but I kind of believe I was. I remember wooden spoons being flailed about. So she also provided some discipline. There was at least 1 year, I think, that we didn't have a TV that worked. And I remember we would go to the library and just get books upon books, and we read a lot those summers. She enjoys reading, and she instilled that, at least in me. I know that I have read so many books because she encouraged the reading. And I enjoy those stories, enjoy being able to do that. That's because Mom was behind that and encouraging us to read and encouraging us to take that time to be able to do that for ourselves. And she's been an anchor for me in my life because of that. Always, I can always talk to Mom. She's one of my best friends, and probably don't go a week without talking to her. There was a lot of my life. It was probably almost every day that I would call and talk to Mom, depending on where I was. If I was, before I was married, I talked to her all the time. If I was at work or had some free time driving, I'd probably give her a call. Now, when I drive for work, when I need to talk to somebody, I call Mom and see what she's doing. We chat. So I guess I'm a mama's boy. I have that in me as well. That's who I turn to talk to. Besides Carly, I call Mom and we chat. One trip we went on that was particularly memorable for me was when we went to down to Mesa Verde for a family vacation. I remember one morning Dad woke me up and said, "Hey, I'm going to go on a hike. I want to take you with me." And we climbed up to the top of this plateau on top of this mesa. And I don't even remember what we talked about. I just remembered that was a special moment that morning that Dad came and got me, and we got to go on a hike, just him and me, for a little bit. And he'd done that quite a few times in our camping events, either going through scouting or just when we were out as a family, go on a hike, and I could go with him at times. Then on the way home from that, what makes that the most memorable moment or memorable trip there was it's the first time I'd seen Dad break the speed limit. So when we were coming home, I don't even know if anybody else remembers this, but I do. Maybe it's just my own memory and I made it up. I don't know. But we were on our way back home, and a truck in front of us, something had fallen off this truck. A bag of some sort had fallen off the truck. And so Dad stopped, picked it up, and he drove 90 miles an hour. I remember it was 90 miles an hour that he hit, so he could catch back up to this truck, and they had taken this other turn. It wasn't even the way we were supposed to go, from my recollection. But he sped up to give these people back their bag, so we were going 90, and that was just thrilling for me. And so I've always driven fast since then. It's his fault. So Grandma gets upset when I speed, but or Mom, I guess, gets upset when I speed, but it's because Dad did it first. Taught me the way. One of those camping trips, Dad turned into MacGyver. This is when we had Bertha, the green Suburban, and we went to LeBaron. We couldn't camp in our normal camping spot. We had to camp across the lake. But on the way there, we hit something, knocked the muffler loose, and so the muffler was, it was just really loud. And so I remember the whole time that we were there at that couple of days camping, Dad was rebuilding the muffler with tin cans and baling wire. So he had to get the Suburban, and he had to drive it up on some rocks so he could get up underneath it. I remember him doing that, so he got it so it was jacked. didn't just jack it up. He got it up, so he drove it up on some things, so he could be working underneath it. He scoured the camps around us for cans and baling wire, and then he fashioned a muffler out of that. I just don't know why it mattered. I don't know why he had to fix that muffler, because it's not like it was not, the car was still working, it was just loud. I guess it bothered him. I've asked him recently, why did you do it? And he doesn't really have an answer except for it needed to be fixed. So, I mean, that was a fun camping trip for one of those reasons, is that he had that, again, taught me how to do all of that. It's not like you can't do something, you can always do something. That got us into trouble a lot, though, because he always tended to go places he shouldn't with the vehicles. We got stuck more than once because Dad said, "Oh, I can make that," and of course Mom's in the passenger seat. Rocky! We heard that a lot growing up as we're driving up Beaver Canyon, and Dad's looking over off the side of the cliffs, because he's just sightseeing, and Mom, of course, is on that side of the car where the wheels are almost ready to go off the edge. Of course, that's what she says. And so I'm sure we're all familiar with that sound, that voice of Mom saying, "Rodney!"
Jenny gave us a run for our money sometimes. Wasn't near as bad as what she thinks it is. She thinks she was awful, but she caused all sorts of trouble. She did a little bit, but not near like I know that other families have had to go through. And she has apologized to every young women leader, primary teacher in our ward, and told them how sorry she was about how awful she was as a teenager and a young girl. I think they were all surprised, because I don't think she was all that bad, but in her mind, she was. And she, I don't know if it's because of her having those feelings, but she just is, she is really, she's a kind, generous person. I've been up there where I've seen her whole counter in her old house just full of casseroles. 5 or 6 casseroles she had lined up there. And she took them to people that day. She wasn't assigned, she just took them. Because she knew that they liked it and that she could do it. And so as long as she's making the mess, she'd make it for all these people. And she still does that, I'm sure. She's really very kind and generous to people that are around her, to us, to our all of our family, and she worries a lot about her kids, but her kids are good kids. They're not going to give her any trouble. She and Curtis, they're good kids, and they do. What I admire about them is everything they do, they pretty much do as a family. They do baseball. If Allie's playing a game, they all go. They're always together. I think that's a good thing.
Some of the memories I have of Dad are when I was in the 3rd grade. He came to the school to get me because I was upset that my substitute teacher had scared me. And he told me that we could go home, but he took me around the back of the library and just talked to me about just having to have mean teachers sometimes, and that I should never be scared of teachers. And he just took the time to talk to me and make sure that I was okay. But I remember that we went home. Like, I did not want to stay because Mrs. Thorpe she was mean, and I didn't like when she was there. But I probably experienced a different set of parents than like Cheryl or Carrie experienced. But my parents were really patient. And I we fought a lot. So I remember them not being patient, but mostly they were always kind and patient with us. But some of the fun things I remember, probably some of my earliest memories are just like Christmas. I always remember Christmases. I remember when we were really little, like the radio station would do 100 song countdown on Christmas night or Christmas Eve or something. So we'd stay up and listen to the radio and listen to all the songs, and we'd all stay downstairs in the bedroom, and then we'd all just huddle at the bottom of the stairs until we were told we could come upstairs. And then you know how Christmas mornings are, you just come upstairs and it's just magical. But I just have a lot of memories of that. But of course I have all the fun memories of camping. And we just spend a lot of time in the mountains, and that was a lot of fun. And I loved it. Dad would always spend hours and hours fishing with us and putting the fishing poles together and fixing them, and when we would ruin them, and that was fun. As a kid, always doing that, fishing and hiking and camping, and some of the other just kind of funny things, like smells, will remind me of things my parents used to do. And so I would walk home from the middle school, and before I would even cross the street, like in the fall, I could smell if my parents were making salsa, because I could smell it, like all the way from our house to the middle school. So the smell of that always reminds me of fall, and they'd always be doing corn or something with the garden and vegetables, and so just certain things remind me of home, of my mom. Like baking bread always reminds me of my mom. But I don't know, we just had a good childhood. I think we were just really blessed. I would describe Mom as somebody who doesn't say mean things about people. She was the Relief Society president twice, and that says something about a woman. But I remember coming home and she would be cooking a meal, and we'd say things like, "Is that for us or is that for someone else?" Because she was usually doing something for someone else. She always was very giving and caring and kind. And now that I'm a mom, you just realize the sacrifice. But some ways I would describe my dad are just extremely hardworking and faithful. Everything my dad did was for us. He sacrificed a lot. Furthered his education so that he could provide a better life for us. I remember him going to school at night, at the school, getting his master's, and he was just a really good example of hard work and diligence. And they were both just very, very good examples of what all strive to be.
Sarah was always going to excel. There was no way that she wouldn't. She wouldn't allow it in herself to not excel. She was very shy as a teenager.
She still is.
We tried to get her involved in, I remember, basketball, and she was not comfortable playing basketball. She spent her time holding her jersey like this when she didn't have the ball, and so. But she has excelled and is successful. She's endured and has prospered.
So I've learned a lot about Dad in the last few years that I've never known about him. He's a pool shark. He can clear a pool table, which I didn't know. And he's told me a lot of stories about being in the Army and things that he did when he was younger. So I think he was a little wilder and crazier than I imagined he was when he was younger. But yeah, I think he's a mystery when he was in the Air Force. And it's because he got in trouble. So he got sent to Alaska as a punishment because he was driving a truck somewhere and took it to some place and they had the oil changed or something, and whoever changed the oil didn't latch the hood, and so when they were driving down the freeway, the hood popped up and did damage to the car, and when he got back to the base, he got in trouble for that and kind of mouthed off a little bit and got sent to Alaska. He's also stole apples from orchards in Washington when he was stationed there for radar tower work. Yeah, so pool shark, apple thief, and mouth off. That's what the stories he tells nowadays. He told us when he was in Alaska, he and his friends would take off on a Friday when they got done with work and just go out and fish and eat the fish that they caught. And I imagine he spent a lot of time out in the wilderness in Alaska. She's very messy. She gets food all over when she cooks and when she eats. She's very clumsy. She falls all the time. And she's very friendly and very not interested in being bored. She's always doing something. And most people would say she's bubbly and personable.
Steve?
Mm-hmm.
Steve is a really good dad. And he's just always been involved in that, even as babies. When the twins were little, it took both him and Kim. I mean, they each would take a baby, and I don't know if that's what started it, probably not. But I've watched him bathe brand new newborn babies, and it doesn't bother him a bit to take this newborn baby and give it a bath and rub it all down and put its clothes on and wrap it in a blanket and take it to its mom. I mean, he is just really a good father, and it shows in their kids. They trust him and they love him.
Story about Mom that I thought was more telling about her spiritual side, and more about her genealogy side. When I was growing up and when I was a teenager, after all the kids had left, when I got home from being out at a dance or anything like that, when I got home late, I would come home and I would shake her arm because they were old this time and went to bed early. So by the time I got home at midnight, they were already asleep. And so I would come and shake my mom's arm and wake her up and say, "Hey Mom, I'm home." And she would be like, "Okay," and turn around, roll back and go to sleep. And then I would go back out and play with my friends. Just kidding, I would never do that.
But what she told me one time happened is she woke up by being shaked on the arm. She almost certainly knew it was me when I was home, and she woke up and looked, and I wasn't there. And when she looked up, she saw a little girl at the end of her bed. And she wasn't scared. She didn't feel threatened, but she didn't know this girl, didn't know who she was. And after a few minutes, the girl left. And Mom woke up Dad, and Dad was mad because she didn't wake him up beforehand so he could see. And so talking through it, my dad told Mom that she needed something. She needed her to do something. And it wasn't a few nights later, I think, similar situation. And she got a shaking of the arm. Again, woke up, figuring it was me home from being out at night, and again, this little girl was standing at the end of the bed. And so my mom said, is there anything I can do for you? Or I can't remember the exact words she said, but is there something you need? And all she said was her name, and then she left. And of course, after everything happened, she woke up Dad again. And then Dad was mad again because she didn't wake him up. But it come to find out that this little girl was part of Mom and Dad's family history. They were she was a relative that had passed a long time ago. And she hadn't had her temple work done, her baptism and all that stuff done. And she just wanted it done. And so she wanted to get a message to Mom to get it done. It just went to show how in touch with the Spirit she was. And is constantly. She knows. And she took that girl's name, did her temple recommend stuff, got her baptism and temple work done, and she never saw her again. But it was those situations that she was in touch with the Spirit enough to know. And to be willing to listen and to be ready for that. And that was one of the coolest stories about her spirituality that not a lot of people know about her. Another cool story about Dad. This is when Mike was with me, and Mike and Dad went camping I went fishing up to Oak City, and I remember we all kind of went our separate ways. Mike went up creek, and Dad went down, and we were all just kind of fishing. And I remember, I can't remember how long it had been, but it felt like it was about an hour or so. And we all kind of went our separate ways on the river. I was probably, 10 or 12. And a lot of time was passing, and I hadn't seen and heard anybody from either of them for a while. And so I was starting to get nervous because it was starting to get late. And so I was getting a little scared about where I was, about where they were. If they were lost or if I was lost, because I had been going up and down the river. And I remember one thing my dad taught me is if you ever needed direction, to say a prayer. and I knelt down and said a prayer that I'd be able to find my dad. When I got done with the prayer, I opened my eyes, and he was standing in front of me. I don't know if he remembers that, but it was one of those things where you know what you're taught to do. And I know everybody's laughing because I'm crying, but that's wouldn't be my stories if I wasn't crying. There's always the funny things about mom putting the milk in the turnaround cupboard instead of the fridge. Or searching for her glasses when they're on her head. Or dad trying to find the cell phone when he's calling on the cell phone. All those funny things where they're just those weird personality things with the two of them. And about how I was thinking that when I was little that there was always a bear in the house, but it was Grandpa snoring. There's just a lot of fun stories and memories. Still upset about the basketball hoop taking 13 years to get installed after we got it when we were like 7. But get over that eventually. Those are my stories and experiences, at least some of them.
That's 7.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Grandma has had to suffer with me all this time.
I knew that's the way it would
Forever.
start out. Go ahead.
She just has had to. She's been almost a parent to 8 instead of just 7, because she's had to deal with me.
I hear that all the time, and I look at him and say, no, that's not true. Right? Isn't that what I say?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. We have got along really good. I can think of very few times that we've been, I wouldn't even say angry at each other.
No.
We just don't get angry at each other. We might get perturbed at each other.
It doesn't last.
Mm-mm. We just have never been fighters, have we?
Mm.
Nope.
We had to live with it too much. When
Yeah.
we were kids.
Yeah. Well, it's just not in my nature. And I don't think it's in yours. We just don't fight. I don't remember fighting with, well, I do remember fighting with kids. More than I should have. But usually it was over something that wasn't all that big of a deal.
I know that there were times when Grandma went to church and came in with 7 kids, put them on a bench, and somebody would probably say, that's Sister Ogden, her husband is inactive.
True.
And I was in the stake presidency for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And all that time,
Never went to church with
most
us.
Sundays where I was gone. And so I'm sure there were people who thought I was inactive, and poor Grandma had all those kids bringing them to church.
Yeah. I did that.
But she did. I see women struggling to get 2 kids to church, all on time and all put together.
Mm-hmm.
And she did it with 7 and could do it every Sunday and be there on time. Well, let me see. How do I do this and stay out of trouble? She is, she's very, she's organized. She is industrious. She works hard, always has something to do. She's kind and considerate. She's a good person, a good mother, good wife. She's considerate of me and patient sometimes with me. That's it.
I'm glad you didn't say a good cook, because I'm not.
You are a good cook.
No, that would mean you were lying about
You've-
all the other stuff.
You fed me for years.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean I'm a good cook.
Good for me.
No. Well, he's always taking care of me. I've never wanted for anything. I've always had a comfortable, warm, nice place to live. We had a comfortable home. We pretty much had anything we wanted or needed and more. Even though there were times that he had to work at a job he hated, he still did it, and he still took care of me and all of our kids. He always made sure we had all the food, more food than we could ever eat. We always felt like we were just taken care of. We didn't have to worry about where our next meal was coming from, because we knew all we had to do was go to the basement and we'd find all the food we wanted. And it was always like that, because he took care of us. Our bills were always paid. I don't remember ever a time that we did not pay a bill. There was a time when Grandpa said he didn't work for a whole year, and I know Cheryl helped us out one time, paid our mortgage payment or something for us, but we never went without paying our bills. We were never late paying our bills, ever. And he took care of finances for us. I never worried about the bank statement or if we had money in the bank. I spent what I needed to spend. I don't think I ever made him go overdraft or anything. He took care of our finances. He took care of us spiritually. When everybody was younger and at home, we were much better about having family home evening. He taught us the gospel, because I didn't really know much when we got married. I mean, I'd been to primary and mutual and all of that stuff, but I really didn't really have much of a testimony. I mean, I always knew that Joseph Smith was a prophet. I never, ever thought that he wasn't. I never doubted what he said. I always thought the Book of Mormon was true. I never doubted that. But I'd never read it, except in seminary. So, I mean, Gramps took care of that. He took care of me spiritually. We went to the temple after we got over our first shock, and we went to the temple regularly. There was a time when we went, we had a goal that we would do 4 sessions a month for a year. And there was one month we hadn't been, and it was the end of the month. We did 4 sessions in one day each. We never did that again.
Close sometimes.
We always went. But so he has taken care of me, and physically when I was hurt or when we had babies, and he was there to take care of me and all of us. So he's just a good taker care of us.
No doubt about it.
Whatever that word is.
Good caretaker.
Good, there you go.
you see yourself growing old with me, watching my hair turn to gray? Could you live with me in my mistakes and the ones I have yet to make? So when our eyes last seen their better days and our hearing starts to fade, push your arms around my neck and your heart on my chest. I love you will still sound the same. I love you will still sound the same. Sound the same. I can see our dreams inside of a child long after ours fade away. When our ring starts to rust and our skin starts to age, remember the promise we made. Hey! So when